appreciate your quick and swift action in providing time in your schedules to hear this student advocacy and appeal. I want to say first off that in this particular case, in an appeal of an ejection from our student athlete, Jay Kutniak, a senior, we do not dispute the facts. We know, and it is evidenced, and the report from the official was clear, that our player made a poor choice in the use of language during the 78th minute of our contest. The appeal today is about access for this young man to complete his senior soccer season with his team with 2 games remaining and the playoffs uncertain. When this rule was designed and placed in the acquisition of our body, I do believe that it was done so in a manner to reduce ejectable offenses and to raise the level of sportsmanship around our state in sports where games exceeded 20 particular contests. In this particular situation, as the rule has now been applied in a situation that has affected a player at River Bluff, I want you to know that I believe the intentions of the rule, but the application of the rule differ. I do not disagree with members of this body and principals around the state that sportsmanship is paramount. In this particular situation, as applied, when now you're feeling the ramifications of the consequence, such a severity of a 3-game suspension associated to an ejection is really felt very harshly in this particular case. And I want to appeal to the committee to consider to reduce this suspension. The young man has already served a 2-game suspension, and there are 2 games remaining in his season. I appeal to this committee to allow the access for him to reduce that 3-game to 2-game, and that as we have future opportunities as principals and athletic directors, that knowing now the effects of a consequence of a rule, of a choice of a 3-game suspension, that we can then proactively make decisions with experience. I have on the call with me today Phil Savitz, our head soccer coach. I would like to give him just a moment to speak on behalf of this situation. But again, I just want to reiterate, River Bluff High School is not disputing the facts. We are asking the committee to consider reducing this appeal to 2 games so that this young man, while having already received consequence and certainly school level learning experience and consequence as well, that he can finish his season with his team in the appropriate manner with playoffs uncertain. Coach Savitz, would you care to just provide a little bit of insight into this appeal?
Thank you, Dr. Klemp, and thank you to those members of the league and executive committee for hearing our appeal today. And as some of you may know, this is my 41st year of high school head coaching in soccer in South Carolina, 33 at Irmo and now 8 here at River Bluff. And those that know me know that in our program, any program that I'm the head coach of, we stress, coach, and reinforce sportsmanship and attitude every single day, and their consequences, not just from the league, but from within our program anytime those are breached. As Dr. Klemp said, we don't dispute that he used a poor choice of language in this game. After 5 years of knowing Jay Kutniak, it's the only time I've ever heard profanity come out of his mouth. It was an emotional and poor choice at the time. But that being said, we're allowed to play a lot of games, but last year we played almost none. That was his first year on varsity as a junior. Now in a shortened senior season, I've only been able to schedule 15 games. So he's actually going to miss over 20% of this season, considering he sat out part of the game that with the red card and now asked to sit out 3 more. He's also going to miss his senior night tonight, where I start and play every senior in a show of gratitude and respect for what they brought to our program. So as Dr. Klemp said, do I agree with what his choice of words that night? No. I felt like the 3-game mandatory suspension was harsh from the beginning. I think it needs to be revisited. And I do ask for you guys to consider his appeal today to become eligible tonight, where he will have been out 2 games plus the red card in the third game where he was suspended.
As a principal and a member of the leadership of Class 5A and Class 4A, when we're given chances and opportunities to review and analyze rules and regulations and make provisions, I will say sometimes we make predictions as to the outcomes of these decisions in hopes that our decisions will actually create an environment that is in the best interest of all of our student athletes. And again, I would say sportsmanship and the intent of this rule with a 3-game suspension, the most I've ever seen, it's the minimum in a situation like this. It's actually not the maximum. 1 game for certain sports, 2 games for certain sports, 3 games for certain sports, and the league acted appropriately associated to the ejection, associated to the sport. But now in feeling and seeing the reaction and the ramifications of this decision, I believe our intent has now created an environment that a young man's going to be limited from access in his senior season, and that the learning experience that, of course, a consequence would allow. Some people in some situations, the consequence prevents the action. In others, it's the learning experience through the consequence that allows for a change in a manner to happen. The last thing I would want to see in a conclusion among this with a young man is that there be something else that be tacked on as a severe case in a situation as this place, that now the learning experience has been altered. And I would say, knowing this young man, I can assure you that he has learned from this experience, as we have all, when choices we've made had rendered consequences. We appeal to this committee and appreciate your consideration so much to allow this young man's suspension to be reduced by 1 game, to allow his access to compete tonight. And that first opportunity would be tonight. And so our timeliness and sense of urgency is upon us to be able to play and perform with his classmates, with his senior class, and then finish that season on Thursday night, regular season game being played then. So I thank you, and I would open up. I do believe there's a few minutes if there are questions. I don't know if there's questions for me or Commissioner or Mr. President, if there were questions that the committee had amongst one another. Thank you for hearing this appeal, and I appreciate your time today.
Dr. Clamp, do you feel you've had the opportunity to present all information, necessary information for your appeal?
Yes, sir, we do.
Okay. Very good. At this time, we will open the floor for committee questions. Committee members, questions?
Mr. President, this is Ryan Brown. I have a question of Dr. Clamp.
Go ahead, Mr. Brown.
Dr. Clamp, can you shed any light on the student academically? I assume it sounds like he's a stand-up guy on the field, but is he doing well academically as well?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question, Mr. Brown. This young man comes in high academic standing and character. His family, his father's on the call, serves in local law enforcement, and we appreciate his service. They have created an environment in the home with high standards, and this young man has met those standards, and we believe his success outside of high school will only be exceeded about the foundation that he's been able to be provided here at River Bluff High School, both academically and athletically.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I couldn't find the raise your hand icon on here, so I'd like to have a question if I could.
Go ahead, Dr. Owen.
Coach Savitz, you know the young man, you coach him every day. I'll ask you this. Are you so confident that he's learned from this situation that if he were to have another episode of profanity that you would immediately remove him from the team for the rest of the year?
You can be 100% assured of that, because had the officials not heard him that night, because he was probably a good 20 yards away from the official. He wasn't right next to him, charging him or anything. Had he not heard him, he wouldn't have continued in that game because I heard him. So I can assure you he or no other player will have a breach of attitude or sportsmanship that I see, whether it's seen by the official or not, and continue to play.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
And I do think in these situations, based on the pandemic last year and the shortened season this year, I know those rules for ejection and so forth were made before a pandemic was on anyone's mind and anyone's radar. So I think every situation we need to look at opportunities for athletes, and that's what this committee and that's what appeals are for, to look at the totality of the circumstance. And discipline is about learning and moving forward and teaching others. So I think, again, I do think the no season last year, all of our seniors, this is a special time for them to have an opportunity to participate.
Thank you.
Mr. Stone?
So, Mr. President, is this just a clarification, questions for the presenters only, or questions of the league staff?
You can ask your questions to either, Mr. Stone.
Mr. Winsky, if you could shed some light on why this rule was amended and put in place, please. And give some background on this rule.
Yes, sir, Mr. Stone. In April of 2019, the executive committee voted 15-0 in favor of moving the ejection number from 2 to 3 games in the sports of basketball, tennis, baseball, softball, and soccer. And I believe Dr. Clamp touched on it. Number one, we had increased the opportunities for regular season contests. It used to be in those sports 16 or 18 games and 2 tournaments, and we blanketed them across instead of games and games a game. Moved total number of games up. In addition to, we were not seeing a downtick in the number of ejections throughout the year. So we proceeded with adding a game for those sports because they were getting more games. Whether they played them or not, the opportunity was there. And additionally, at the same time, this committee voted in favor of 15-0 to increase the number of games for coach ejections from 1 to 2 and keeping the fine at $300.
Recalling this, Mr. Winsky, wasn't there an increase in ejections during that time, and this was put in place to try to decrease the number of ejections?
Yes, sir. That was part of the process of doing it. In addition to, again, we increased the number of games from 18 and 2 tournaments to a 26 games. So trying to keep that percentage count for total ejections for the total number of games allowed. And also there was an increase in ejections. We were trying to help continue to remedy that and decrease it. Of course, we didn't get through a full year last year to know what those numbers were, but just a quick snapshot. Last year in the spring alone, we had 41 student athletes who were ejected and were given 3-game suspensions. Of those 41, I believe 34 of those were in soccer. So even though we only played a few weeks, we still had a number in that sport that experienced that. And of course, those that were ejected, it carried over into the next sports season they played if they were not able to complete that ejection or that penalty inside the same regular season.
Thank you. And is there, Commissioner, can you touch on the number of ejections that have taken place during the 2021 academic year sports season?
Yes, sir.
And the number of appeals that have been brought to the committee as well from those ejections.
Yes, sir. I'll have Commissioner Brooks to share that. He has those numbers with him.
Thank you. The number of ejections for our sports that carry a 3-game minimum, boys soccer, 90, girls soccer, 20, baseball, 39, softball, 1, tennis, 1, boys basketball, 43, girls basketball, 15 was the number of reports submitted, just 209.
Okay, Rick, thank you, Mr. Brooks. And out of those 209, how many have appealed that 3-game suspension?
There's none that have been brought before you. There have been several that have been brought before me. I I've shared with them that we've applied it consistently. Those that we've applied that have applied for appeals has been the minimum, that have asked for a reduction to the minimum. They do not dispute the fact that the violation occurred. Given the information that I would have provided to me and looking into it, I maintained the consistency that the membership had put in place for the basic minimum. So there was no adjustments that were made. A couple of things we tried to be sure of as we work our way through it at our coaches clinic for each sport. The conversation about ejection is part of it. So all coaches that have gone through the coaches clinic were made aware of what the ejection counts will be for a given offense. You know, it's our hope that they will take that information back to their schools and share it with their athletes to help them to understand that you make these decisions for unsportsmanlike conduct being your choice, that there is a sanction for it, and we'll have to deal with those. So there were several that have brought it forward and said they wanted to appeal it, but given the circumstances, that it was the minimum. I would exercise discretion whenever above the minimum is used, because it does become a little bit more subjective. But the thought is, for consistency purposes, and I think that's what the membership would appreciate, is that we treat those things that the minimum that the membership has agreed to, that we treat those things and keep it in place, unless there's some extenuating circumstances, which would be a case such as a hardship. Of course, we all know the definition of a hardship because it's spelled out in the book.
Commissioner.
Dr. Klemp, if this happened on a normal school day to where a student were to use, as reported, that I'm reading off the report, if this were in your school building on a daily basis, just by chance, and this student actually was walking down the hallway and made this statement, what would the penalties be when directed at the authoritative figure from your administrative handbook?
Oh, sure. So every school district has a behavior code, and certainly the members of this body representing multiple school districts around the state, those codes could very well be different. So I'm certainly not privy to know, for example, in Spartanburg or Batesburg or Nations Ford, what that consequence would be. Use of profanity is a suspendable offense in Lexington 1. Suspendable offense then provides the principal discretion to choose not only the medium for suspension, but the quantity of suspension. What I mean by medium, Mr. Student, I know you're principal, but I know there's others not. I mean, in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, even an intervention such as Saturday school that we use where academics become more priority. We can make those choices as principals depending on the particular case. But the use of profanity in Lexington 1 at River Bluff High School is a suspendable offense.
Okay, so just to further, not putting you on trial here, Dr. Klemp, just curious. So if this student were walking down the hallway, and I'm sure you've seen the report that was made in the language that was quoted in quotations from this official, if the official, then we replace the official with the case of a teacher, and this student's walking down and actually said this instead of ref, replace that with teacher, in terms, what would that student receive at River Bluff High School?
Yeah, I'm certainly more than willing to answer that question. If you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a question. What's the intent of that remark? What is the intent behind that question? Are you
just
seeking
making
a
a comparison.
parallel between a soccer match and algebra class?
No, sir, that's the question. I mean, you can answer or not. It's up to you. But
I was just wondering, in this case, where we're talking about a student's eligibility for soccer, what might be the parallel to a scenario that's hypothetical about algebra class?
We're dealing consequences. It's fair to ask.
Well, being a principal here for 10 years, I would tell you any use of profanity towards any authority would be suspendable. And so we would take that case individually, and we would be sure that we've got all the facts to make the decision. I have as principal discretion to suspend up to 1, 2, maybe 3 days. We then would be sure that we had all the facts If it's authoritarian in nature, certainly consequences could be more severe than that. But we've got to be sure we've got all the facts in the case, and that we've also got to be sure that we've given the child due process, and we've gotten the remarks from the teacher and remarks for the situation.
President Tootin, it's Kyle. I was wondering if I could just follow up on your line of questioning. Dr. Clamp, I guess the parallel as the officials representative that I would have is that official for that moment in time is the authority figure, as a principal or an assistant principal would be at a school. And it isn't as if the young man made it as a passing remark because he missed a shot. He made the comment, and it's at his own words, that he was disappointed with the officiating of the game, and he directed the comment in the direction of the official. It isn't, I would give him a pass if he missed the winning shot and uttered an expletive that we might not all like. But the reality is he directed this, whether his back was turned or not, at the person in charge. And I guess that's the parallel.
Mr. Tootin, if I may speak, and just to clarify too, I think your line of question, Mr. Tootin, and I guess Dr. Clamp, he's, according to on page 51 of the student code of conduct, it states that the student code of conduct is in effect when the student is on school property anytime, and this has come from your district's code of conduct, at any school-sponsored event on a school bus or other school district, and at all times and all places where the student's conduct has a direct and immediate effect on the district's interest. So I guess that's where that line of question was coming from Mr. Tootin, and just to clarify that for you as well.
Mr. Johns.
Mr. President Tootin, if I may please ask a question of Coach Savitz.
By all means, sir.
Coach Savitz, sir, and first of all, just as a high school person in the state, your contribution to young people and to soccer program in the state is second to none. So I wanted you to hear me say that, sir. Does tonight's game, although it's senior night, does tonight's game have any playoff implications for y'all, for your program?
Thanks for that question. I appreciate your comments. If we win our next two games, we're region champions and on to the playoffs. If we lose either one, we are not in the playoffs. We just played White Knoll last week, and with mostly reserves, we won 8-0. So, and that was at White Knoll. So the outcome of this game isn't even a consideration for me. I don't believe any combination of players, they bust their tails, they're well coached and they play hard, but they're undermanned and don't have quite the quality that some other teams in this region do. So I don't think at home on senior night, we will lose to a team that we beat 8-0 at their place last week. My concern is that I think the rule, and I know that we're not going to change the rule today, but I think it does need to be looked at moving forward in terms of a minimum 3-game suspension. I've talked to many other coaches and referees that also feel the way that I do, that it needs to be a lesser minimum, but reviewable by the high school league. So no, this game is really of no consequence in terms of, am I worried about, are we going to win it or not? It is this kid playing on senior night and not missing over 20% of the season. And I know Mr. Winsky said we have these number of games we can play, whether we play them or not. But in a shortened season, I tried to jam games in, but our Capital City Cup got canceled. And due to COVID concerns, I was only able to schedule 15, and that's scheduling 2 a week minimum. And so it's going to result in over 20% of his season if he gets the 3-game on top of missing senior night. Those are my concerns.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Coach Savitz.
Thank you.
Mr. Stone? Mr. Stone, did you have a question?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I thought I unmuted myself. My apologies. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Coach Savitz, just curious to know, you're waiting until the last game. I guess tonight would be the last home game.
Well, actually, no, Chapin is the last home game because it was rescheduled from a team quarantine we had a couple of weeks ago for 2 weeks.
Okay. But you're having senior night tonight. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's been scheduled for tonight all season.
Gotcha. All right. And just
That's
that,
our home game.
right. And I know many other districts and schools across the state, due to the pandemic and the, COVID guidelines and quarantines, things like that. Was there any ever discussion with your athletic director, to maybe host senior nights? Because I know many other schools across the state are, do that at the first part of the season. That way you're guaranteed at least to have that senior night then,
Correct.
instead of waiting until the end.
I'll
the
answer
season?
that one. I'll answer that one for you, Coach Savage. Thank you, Mr. Stone, for that question.
Mhm.
A school our size, with the number of activities that we have, men's and women's sports, hundreds of athletes, many of whom have multi-gender families that traverse multiple sports. We did our absolute best to disperse those senior nights, not only to provide access for parents, but the community. And in some cases, we had to reschedule those, but I'm sure, Mr. Stone, you had to make some unique decisions in your building as you tried to schedule those. Those local decisions were made in the coordination both with our district athletic director, myself, and our head coach. And up to this point, through the spring, we've been able to make all those scheduled activities happen, and not in conflict with any of our fine arts events either as the spring came. So we did have some of our senior nights as a program the first and second weeks of our season. But with multiple sports and multiple genders and multiple nights, we did our absolute best not to conflict between the other activities we had on our campus.
All right. Thank you.
Ms. Miller, did you have a question?
I did. And this would be, I guess, towards either Commissioner Singleton or Winsky or Brooks, and then also to Coach Savitz. Certainly, we're really big on sportsmanship, and I think we all are. Every single person on this call. And Coach Savitz, I too acknowledge and appreciate everything that you have given to students and schools and athletes in South Carolina, both you and your wife,
Thank you.
by the way, who was an excellent science
I'll
teacher.
tell you that.
And I guess it concerns me though, when Mr. Brooks gave us the numbers that boys soccer is more than double any other sport, the ejections. I'm just curious, what type of offenses, and I guess this would be from high school league, what general type of offenses? I don't need a breakdown, just what are our top 3 reasons for those ejections that we're seeing? And then Coach Savitz, do you see any other way? I certainly agree with and support the league trying to lessen. I appreciate coaches like you who set that example and that expectation and hold students accountable for that. But I do think that when we have a sport that's more than double, something more needs to be done to help with that. So I'm just curious what those top kind of ejectionable offenses are, and what can we do to decrease those, not only in soccer, but across every sport?
Well, we constantly work on anything or have discussion on anything that we can do to reduce the number of ejections that we possibly could have. We only have limited resources available to us. We talk about it. We create workshops that address it. We try to be consistent on it. We bring it to the coach's attention whenever we have a rules clinic. to talk directly on those things. It's not just a challenge in South Carolina, it's a challenge nationally across the country. And everybody's trying to find that silver bullet to make it work. What we can do is try to continue to be consistent in what we try to do. Let's put something in place. Let's make sure that all of the key stakeholders have an opportunity to see it, but they share it with everybody that could be impacted by it. Those numbers that we have are truly high. A lot of it would be, and I won't get directly into the breakdown, but a lot of it is profanity. And I think we're spending more and more time, I think, becoming a little bit more accepting of profanity. But that's not what is allowed. That's not what the Federation rules allow. So we address it. We address it as such. There are some that would think that because the soccer ejection has always been higher than most of our other sports, and some would think because it's a sport that's also played quite often organized outside of the school system. And there's opportunities for kids or athletes to get used to being able to do certain things that won't be tolerated, i.e. use profanity, i.e. talk back to the official. Those type of things we ensure, and we make sure that our officials don't tolerate that. We stress that that's not going to occur, but we don't just do it at that one end. We share it with the coaches to make them understand, says these type of things are not tolerated. And we ramp it up as much as we can. The thing we don't want to do is attach fines to it, because then it gives the connotation that you can just buy your way out of making any decision that you choose to have. I think when we look at the reduction of the opportunity to be a part of something, I think it resonates. I truly think it resonates a whole lot more than what it is. What I don't want us to forget, truly, we know that in athletics, there's going to be conflict. How you respond to the conflict is the answer. And that's the lesson that's being taught. So we don't want to miss out on the teachable moments of what we have. I think Dr. Clamp said it best. Let's make sure that a learning takes place. But what we have in place. We don't take our Constitution and just change it in the middle of the stream. There may be a bad bylaw or Constitution item that we have that we need to change, but there's an appropriate time to do it. We'll deal with it. But now what is provided to us is the ability to set it aside for given reason, hardships. That's spelled out. Unsportsmanlike conduct is a choice. There's not something that couldn't be foreseeable or uncontrollable, any of those type of things. So we'll continue to work on it. It's challenging that we look at it every year and we have such a high number of ejections across the board. And we try to address it as such. What has happened when we increase the number of games that a coach is suspended for being ejected, that number took a nosedive. It took a nosedive. We increased the number for player being ejected. It's still open to see. We got to figure it out. We got to figure out, maybe is the information getting to them? Do they understand what's at stake when they do it? That's what has to happen. Then they can make a conscious decision as to whether they want to commit this violation or not. We all understand the rules of the game. You get 2 red cards, you're out. You get 5 fouls, you're out. You get 2 unsportsmanlike conduct, you're out. They need to have a better understanding of what the penalty is beyond that. Then they can make a conscientious decision as to, well, I'm not going to do that. And again, we get that opportunity to have that teachable moment while there's little at stake. A teachable moment that the worst thing going to happen is you're going to miss an opportunity to be a part of something that you were there. If it happens later in life, we all understand what other consequences can come from that.
Dr. Bryant, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. This is for Coach Savitz as well, and I totally agree with everything the commissioner just said, but I also know that it is a different year. I am explaining that to students every day, and the percentage concerns me. That Coach Savitz, how many games would you have had last year had we gotten to play the season, and then what was the number again this year? Because we too have had a terrible time scheduling things. So I totally understand where you're coming from with that.
Typically, we play a preseason tournament We actually quad host one here in the Midlands, one of the biggest ones around in this state. And typically we get anywhere from 3 to 5 games, depending on how you do in that tournament. And then if you schedule 2 games a week, I don't ever schedule over spring break because to me that's family time, and I'll practice over spring break, but not schedule unless it's an emergency. Typically you get around 16 games. You can squeeze them in. This year I only got 15. But so if we were to win the tournament and get 16 games in, you're looking at 21 games. And this year the tournament got canceled again. And we did get to play so far. If the next 2 come off, the one tonight and the one Thursday, we'll have played 15 games. And that's it. So we're talking about 21 games over 2 years.
Mr. Cade.
Coach Savage, just a quick question for you. Understanding that, again, as you have stated about the shortened season and the challenges of the season, my question is simply this. Did you at any point get a chance to discuss with your team at any point during the season consequences of an ejectable offense? I know that's something that we do here at my school. So I'm just trying to reinforce it with the coaches as well as with the players. So did you get that opportunity? Were the kids aware that the possibility of being ejected from a game, what those consequences would look like, and did you get an opportunity to do that?
We did those in meetings and every week at practice. Reminded them of the magnitude of the consequences that are in place now. Told them about it every day. I don't think we even came close to having any other player ejected this year. I try to set the example for my players. I believe leadership is about example. And in 41 years of high school coaching, I've never had a red card. I've never been ejected from a game, and very few of my players have been. So that example is set and reinforced, if not every day, weekly within our program.
Dr. Owens.
That's the only way I know how to raise a hand, Sam.
That's old school. You good.
And maybe Mr. Buskowski can help, but yellow card, red card, is profanity automatic red card every time, or sometimes officials do a yellow card? Is this basically left up to the judgment of the refs in every case? I mean, I'm at a lot of athletic events and I do see referees pull kids over, talk with them, talk to a coach, and I just didn't know if soccer, again, with what Ms. Miller said with the number of ejections, is it automatic red card if someone hears profanity, or is a yellow card an opportunity?
Dr. Owens, but it's okay. I'll answer that since I handle the rules of soccer, if that's all right. I don't know that Kyle, even though he's an official, is efficient or knowledgeable on the rules of soccer. The answer to that question is it varying degrees. Soccer has a rule code with yellow cards. Of course, 2 yellow cards equivalent to a red card, and ejection or straight red is equivalent in ejection. The use of profanity, not directed at anyone. I think someone mentioned earlier about miss a goal and I scream something out. The official has a discretion to use that as a yellow card, which essentially becomes a technical foul or a unsportsmanlike penalty in football, to where if they got that again a second time in a match, they would automatically be disqualified. In soccer, you have the ability to argue with an official as long as you do so politely. And there comes a point where you've gone too far with that, and they will hit you with a yellow card for what they call in their codes for dissent. Of course, 2 of those would equate to an ejection of offense. However, soccer rules state for the federation that use of abusive or obscene language is considered a straight red card. So I would think in this case, and I'm not surely trying to apply judgment on what the official did, but if it was directed at him, I'm assuming he considered that to be abusive, obscene language, and appropriately applied the straight red card to it by rule.
Any further questions from committee members?
Yeah, hi, this is Tony. I got a question. Sorry, I can't figure out that flag either. So,
You all right? Go ahead.
tell her the coaches and or the parent, if he's on there, is this the first time in this kid's career that he's had any issues like this? I don't know how many years he's played soccer.
Sir, he's played since he was
Yes, sir.
5 years old and has never received a red card. I got that straight from his dad and himself. And just to reiterate, I've known him for 5 years, and the only words I've ever heard come out of his mouth are gentle, appropriate, complimentary words. And it shocked me to no end, but he had just been kicked in the face in this game with no call. And then we did have another player right in front of us get undercut pretty severely with no call. I was reacting on the sidelines, asking the official for some clarity, and he overreacted in an improper way. But no, the first time ever that I know of, and the first time for sure in 5 years that I've been coaching him.
Okay.
Hey,
Parent, did you
board,
want to
this
say
is,
something?
this is Chris Hutniak, Jake's father. And I would just like to point out that, I mean, he has not had a red card ever in his entire soccer career. I know Coach Savitz has done a wonderful job with him over the last, 5 years or so, but Jake has played since he was, I want to say 4 or 5. And I know that they're not going to have red cards back then, but even as he played for club and everything else, he has never had a red card. And I can probably put on one hand how many yellow cards he's had. He's a very mild-mannered young man. We teach that in our home. We do not, we're not a family of cussing and swearing and using that stuff. He got a very stern talking to about it as well. He knew right when he did it, he was wrong. And he's definitely learned that. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Trahan.
Yes, sir. Just wanted to ask, so my understanding is a 3-game suspension. The young man got the red card and I'm just asking at what point in the game and then what nights did he sit out? What games has he sat out so far?
Coach Savage, correct me if I'm wrong. He was red carded in the 78th minute of the game. And that was on 4/19, April 19th. He sat out that Wednesday night game against White Knoll, and he sat out that Friday night game versus Chapin. And now we are into the next week of play. So
Thanks, sir.
the third game to fulfill the entire suspension would be tonight.
Thank you.
Further questions? Hearing none, do we have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Tootin.
Go ahead, Mr. Brown.
Given the shortened season due to COVID-19 and the fact that the student will have served 2 games, which I think is a fair amount of time, given a fair punishment, given what was done, I would move to grant the appeal to uphold the penalty, but shorten it to 2 games instead of 3.
I second.
We have a motion on the floor
Mr. Tootin, it's Kyle. I just wanted to be heard on that motion. It concerns me greatly.
Hold on, Mr. Buskowski. Just a second. Let me get it out on the floor. Make sure and restate here. All right. The motion on the floor is given the shortened season as a result of COVID-19. The motion is made to grant the appeal and to shorten the suspension to 2 games instead of 3. That was a second by Dr. Bryant. Mr. Buskowski, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to speak briefly on this. I'm extremely concerned about a precedent that we're setting. We've already heard that there's over 300 student athletes that were ejected in this current school year, which was just as affected by COVID-19. And none of those 300 athletes were granted a reduction. This was a measure that was put in place by the executive committee 2 years ago in an attempt to curb the amount of unsporting behavior. We hear by the statistics that it's frankly not working in soccer. It's a sport that has the most unsporting behavior. So to set aside a rule that we put in place to try to stop something that we're not stopping seems questionable. But just in general, the precedent that we're setting, this is a young man, and I take everyone's word for it that he's a terrific young person and a great student. I have no reason to doubt that. He did something that you can't do. He directed an expletive in the direction of an official because he was unhappy with his call. The penalty for that is ejection, and that ejection carries a 3-game penalty. Everyone knows it. Now, the folks at River Bluff raise a good point. Is that a good penalty? I don't know, but I wouldn't question the wisdom of our members who thought it was 2 years ago by a vote of 15-0. So I'm not sure the grounds. Simply, we feel sorry for the young man. He's a good person. He wouldn't do it again. All things that I think are valid and that I will believe. I just think we're setting a very dangerous precedent that the next time we have an appeal like this and we don't grant it, what's the grounds to not granting it? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buskowski, for your input.
I'd like to explain my motion and why I made it, and hopefully answer some of Mr. Buskowski's comments.
Okay, remember not to inflict or portray any way you are voting, sir.
Sure. I just want to explain the motion, and it is not related to, quite frankly, not related to anything the coach and the principal, Dr. Clamp, spoke about. It simply, we are in a shortened season due to COVID-19. And this is the whole reason why this process exists, because when this rule was written and I voted on it, I was one of the 15 people that voted in favor of it. We did not contemplate COVID-19. And that is why this body and the membership of the South Carolina High School League depends on us to hear these cases and to take those matters into consideration. So I would happily hear any appeal related to COVID-19 that has had a detrimental impact on a student athlete. And I think that that's what we're charged to do, particularly in times of chaos. So that is the rationale behind the motion that I introduced. And I don't think it's going to set any precedent, because I hope the next school year is a much more normal one and that scheduling is easier. You're able to schedule a full season. And I think we still need to continue to address, disciplinary conduct by student athletes and ensure that they're, behaving appropriately. But given the offense, given the punishment, and given the shortened COVID-19 season, I think 2 games rather than 3 is an appropriate punishment.
Thank you, Mr. Brown, for your input. Any others? Very well. Hearing none, we have a motion on the floor that, given the shortened season as a result of COVID-19, that motion is to grant the appeal to shorten the 2-game suspension, or excuse me, shorten the 3-game suspension to 2 games. We have a second by Dr. Bryant. At this time, Ms. Boozer, if you wouldn't mind, a yes vote means that you are in favor of granting the appeal of shortening the suspension from 3 games to 2 games. So a yes vote means that you are in agreement with shortening the 3-game suspension to 2 games. Ms. Boozer, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay. Carol Owens,
Yes.
Anna Miller,
Yes.
Sonia Bryant,
Yes.
Michael Stone,
No.
Laura Hickson,
No.
Jason Johns,
No.
Andrea Pridgeon,
No.
Josh Trahan,
No.
Tony Folk,
Yes.
Mike Beasley,
No.
Carlos Cave,
No.
Ryan Brown,
Yes.
Cal Bizkowski.
No.
And I think Candace Bethay, you've joined the meeting. Sorry.
Yes.
Your vote is a yes.
Yes.
So I have 6 yes, 8 no.
What this means, Dr. Clamp, is that this motion has failed with a vote of 8-6. Any other comments, statements at this time? Hearing none. What this means, Dr. Clamp, is that the motion, your motion to appeal the 3-game suspension to shorten it into 2 games has failed by a vote of 8-6. Again, if you wish to appeal the executive committee's decision to the appellate panel, please contact the lead commissioner within 24 hours of this hearing. Okay. Thank you. The agenda item, as we move through, there was an item for other business. Commissioner?
Yes, sir. Just wanted to share with you, I had an opportunity to meet with Chair in the House of the Legislature, Ms. Rita Allison, and to discuss the private school students being able to compete at the public school if the sport is not offered. It's already passed the Senate. The House has taken it up and they have questions to it. They're not necessarily open to going with it the way it's written. So they are looking at it and they're looking to bring about some possible changes to it. The Independent School Association is also not in agreement with that bill as written, and they're trying to see if there's some compromise that could probably occur in how we could possibly address it. Other than that, unless there's some questions, there's no other pressing business that we have. Everything that we have, we shared last week at our regular meeting.
Thank you for that update, Commissioner. Hearing no questions or comments regarding that, and no other business, I have a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion that we adjourn.
Mr. Boskowski.
Second.
With the second, I hope everyone has a wonderful remainder of the week. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.